I'm guessing you and all your kids are familiar with Taylor Swift. In recent days, she's received lots of publicity for her new album, The Life of a Showgirl. And there's one particular song on the album that's garnered attention for its blatantly sexual and obscene lyrics. Because kids are listening and singing along, we need to teach our kids to think critically and Christianly about all music and media, and this particular song is a perfect place to start. Stick with us as we chat with a couple of youth workers about the song, their students, and how they will be addressing it on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Youth Culture Matters. I'm Walt Mueller here at the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, and those of you who are familiar with what we do, you know that we track with today's youth culture, and we are looking at how to help youth workers and parents and educators, anybody else who cares about loving and leading kids, that would include grandparents as well, to bring the light of God's Word to bear on the realities that exist in their world. We call some of those things cultural artifacts, and certainly we look a lot at the world of music and media. If you've tracked with us over the years, you're familiar with our How to Use Your Head to Guard Your Heart, 3D Guide to Making Wise Media Choices, and also the little book I wrote, A Student's Guide to Navigating Culture, which you can use with your students, where we look the same way at sort of a three-step process of looking at the world, what's the world telling us, then putting that under the light of God's Word, and then talking about how to walk. And so we're going to have a conversation today with a couple of youth workers. These are actually folks who are CPYU research fellows, so you'll probably be familiar with them if you're a regular listener to the podcast, or if you download some of the many resources that we're putting up week by week to help you in your quest to understand and address things in youth culture. And so Katie Schneider, who's a youth worker in Wisconsin. Did I get that right, Katie? When I get to the Midwest, I get a little mixed up. But you are in Wisconsin. You're a cheesehead, right?
Got it.
Yep, she's a cheesehead. And then, actually, we got a guy from Canada. So Tim McAlpine, who's in Calgary, would we call you a curd head? Have you ever been called that?
I've been called worse, but you could.
Okay, all right, we'll call you a curd head. Which you like curds, don't you, Chris? Chris Wagner's here as well.
Love cheese curds.
Yeah, you love cheese curds. Anyway, I had no idea it just sounds disgusting to me, but I do like cheese. So, but anyway, these guys are joining us, and this is one of those podcasts where when I got up this morning, knowing we were going to record this, I didn't know whether to shower beforehand or wait to shower afterwards because of the topic we're going to address today and talk about. But it is mainstream, and just so you know, I did shower already. I'm going to have to shower after this again. But it is a mainstream, what we call a cultural artifact that dropped last week. And some of you know you've listened to the music from Taylor Swift. I don't know. Is there anybody more popular out there right now in the world of music? She's doing a lot with another popular gal, Sabrina Carpenter. But Taylor Swift, you know, you would have to say she's probably one of the best known, loved by the widest, I would guess, spectrum of listeners, young, middle-aged, old alike. And we're at a point where just anything she does, we accept as being normal. And we talk here a lot at CPYU about how the culture is catechizing our kids, answering their basic developmental questions. You know, who am I? The search for identity. What do I believe? The search for an understanding of developing a worldview. What is it that I believe? And then the question, where do I belong? And I would even add to that, how do I belong there? And so Taylor Swift, she's defining life for so many as she reveals so much about her life. And I want to say right out of the gate that, you know, as an artist, any artist at all, who's out there. And some, are more talented than others. But everything that goes into music artistry, from recording to technology to production, the marketing, everything that's going on, you have to understand that these are things that are made by divine image bearers. We don't want to devalue these people as human beings. They're made in the image of God and given tremendous creative gifts and abilities that they're using. The issue is in what direction is what they're producing, what they're making, what they're releasing, and what direction is that pointing? Is it pointing to things that are good, true, right, and honorable, promoting the things of the kingdom of God, or is it pointing to the things that the Scriptures call the world, the flesh, and the devil? And those of you who are familiar with the Scriptures know which way we need to go as we live or endeavor to live out, as we should, as followers of Jesus Christ, God's shalom, his way and will for the world. And so that's why we want to talk about this, because we found that, as in the past, there's a wide audience for this, not only age-wise, but even within the church, where there seems to be a diminished sense of the ability to exercise wisdom and to have any kind of discernment. And a lot of that just comes from the desensitization that exists for all of us of swimming in this cultural soup. So let me start with this. We're going to talk specifically about one song, and I have not listened to the entire album, but I did hop on to listen to this one song because immediately after it was released, it got a lot of press. And I know that Katie and Tim have listened to this. They've thought about it. We've talked about it. We're going to talk about it here. But it's, as you can guess, and by the way, we're going to get pretty explicit here, but not saying anything that's not in the music or in the song or that your kids haven't already listened to. But the song's called Wood. So let's talk first about, I'm going to ask these guys, when did you, and Chris, feel free to chime in as well. When were you first made aware of the song, and what was your initial reaction? Katie, you're doing youth ministry there in a church. Tim, you're a chaplain doing youth ministry in a Christian school there in Canada. Chris is working with students here with a local youth group. Yeah, thoughts? Anybody? When you first heard it?
The first time, it was actually a text you sent out to us, because I can't remember what was going on, and so I went, and to be honest, my first thought was, chances are my kids are aware of this, and so I want to have a conversation with them, and I think initially I had a sense of like a hope that maybe it's not as bad as it sounds. Maybe
Well, it's
whatever,
just being an idiot. Yeah, I'm overstating.
Or just having a day and whatever. Yeah. But I felt you even undersold it in some way, where I just, you start reading through the lyrics and listening to it, and my initial response was I was heartbroken, because I knew there were students that I love and care for that would listen to this and be like, this is awesome, and would know the lyrics and would understand the innuendos and would understand what's being said, and not have a filter or a conviction that goes, I want to turn this off. Like something shifted and so I was sad.
Yeah, we'll get into that as we unpack the lyrics a bit. But as you said, the innuendo, it's a kind thing to say thinly veiled, because it really isn't veiled at all. I mean, anybody who's been a kid or who's been an adult and paying attention knows what she's singing about. Katie, what about you?
Yeah, I think the first time I was made aware of it too was when you had sent out, I don't remember if it was a text or an email, but I immediately went and just read through the lyrics, and all I could think about was we've seen this before.
Yeah.
I grew up in the days of Britney Spears and a little bit of Miley Cyrus, and it was like the same pattern. They start as these, young teenagers, and there's this sense of innocence and purity. And then they get a little bit older and they start singing about, heartbreak and romance and all the things. But over time, it just gets more and more sexual and provocative. And I think my first thought, honestly, went to like parents my age. As a millennial, I know that there's a large demographic, there's a large group of us that listen or have listened to Taylor, because she came out like right when we were like coming into high school and college. And thinking about the parents, the moms specifically, who grew up with Taylor and now are passing that on to their children, um, like that almost scared me more. Um, that we have parents who think this is okay. And so they're allowing their children, you know, however old they are, to think this is okay too. And that's, as a mom, that really bummed me out.
Yeah.
On top of what Tim said, just the like, just you're almost grieved by it. This, like, why do we have to keep doing this over and over and over again? Like, can we not just have an artist that just stays clean, if that's the right word, like stays with the sense of like innocence, and still be able to enjoy their musical gifts that God has given them, without swinging all the way into where we've gotten to with Taylor.
Yeah, and the frustration and the lament I hear from you is, in my, because I experienced that as well. I mean, we've been doing this for 35 years here, for well over a decade. I was a youth pastor before that, and you really are committed to and passionate, or at least we should be, about teaching the truths of God's word, seeing our kids being transformed by Christ, walking as imitators of God, as disciples of Jesus Christ, out of a sense of gratitude for what he's done for them through their salvation. And, so and there's always this pushback, right? Because our kids are swimming, as we say, in that soup of the youth culture. But then when something like this comes out, you really feel like it's pressing against and pushing back on everything we're trying to do. And you just sort of, you just get upset. Now how do I deal with this? And my kids are going to be attracted to this because, as you said, it's packaged well and it's done well. The production is, it is top notch. And so you have to be aware of that. But you did say something else, just about why do we have to keep going there, and this is kind of the way it is. And Chris, when I came in and was, spouting off to you about this, you had a comment. Do you remember what you said to me?
I don't remember exactly what I said, but I remember the sentiment around it. I basically wasn't surprised.
Yeah, you said this is normal. What are you surprised by?
Yeah, in other words, and hopefully it's not a desensitization to it, but like in some ways maybe this is new for Taylor Swift, but this is top 40 radio. Like this is this is what people listen to. This is what it's like, so I no longer I still lament all of it together collectively, but I don't get worked up so much over a particular single song anymore. At the same time, I do think because Taylor is so popular, and perhaps the most popular artist of recent years, and perhaps maybe this is that chance to open people's eyes about, like, hey, do you realize this is all the music that we listen to collectively? Yeah. Sure, this is one particular song, but like a lot of the music that kids are listening to, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And so maybe, and I think, I still don't know if people don't care, if people aren't aware, they just aren't thinking about lyrics. I think it's
what's a big deal? It's just music, right?
It's a combination of all that and more. But yeah, that's sort of the sentiment.
Yeah. I think the big thing with this was, kind of like Katie said, you've got somebody who, she's very mainstream, all right? So when you look at the Billboard charts, and we look at the Billboard charts, there's a lot of this stuff on there. And there are certain genres and certain artists who you just expect this from. And they are mainstream artists, obviously, because they're on the charts and they're on the radio, but they're not as mainstream. And I think the young audience, the young listener who's easily influenced, and as Katie said, the moms who are serving as the go-between and putting this in their kids' hands and paying for the tickets to go to the concerts and sing along with their kids, that's a big deal.
I think to jump off that, I think like kind of what you said, because it's almost as if like teenagers aren't listening to that top 40 anymore, and so parents don't actually know what they're listening to, and what they are listening to is oftentimes actually much worse than this example. So where I think this conversation becomes interesting is it is the young parents and the young kids conversation, because the young kids are still they're still catching on to that top 40 stuff, where the teenagers have sort of moved on to their niche genres and artists and stuff like that. That's a little bit more underground still, if you can call it that in today's world. So that conversation between what young mothers are letting their daughters listen to and stuff like that is still top 40, because they still see top 40 as sort of safe. And
well, I'll say it's young adult. Like, it certainly trends low like that, but it's young adults as well. I mean, I was surprised on social media to see people that I knew, folks who are followers of Christ, posting their pictures, waiting for the album to drop or having the album drop and getting excited. Even one USA Today article that included numerous photos from the youngest of the young girls up to those who were older. It seemed like a progression, getting excited about, having that. I want to comment on something Katie said there, which I thought was very insightful, and she sees this, and we've written about this, and we have to go back and see. I don't know if that article, How to Make a Pop Star, is still on our website. Maybe you can check and see that, but that's one that I wrote years ago when we were putting things in print. And just a little bit of background on that I had been talking for a long time about some of the artists that Katie's mentioning there, and even earlier in the 90s, about this progression that there always seems to be. You come in, you're marketed as sort of back in the old days, a teeny popper pop, bubblegum pop image. This is very innocent. Parents who at the time had a bit more discernment and wisdom and were concerned about what their kids were being exposed to would say, well, there's all that other bad stuff out there. This just seems pretty vanilla, so we're going to allow this. And then what would happen over time is, you've got these young kids listening, and then they start to grow up and they want to detach regarding their musical interests from the things that their parents would approve of. That's, sort of the process of individuation. And their tastes change, and so they want to go to more music that is a little bit edgy. And in the music industry, what would happen, I remember, being in junior high or middle school, and then by the time you get to high school, you're not listening to what the younger kids are listening anymore. That's like, you still listen to, and you would name some of these people who the young kids would listen to, and that was an insult. Even though you listened to them in the past, you've grown out of that. So now you want something edgy. Well, what happened with that trend was that these pop stars would lose their audience because the audience grew out of them. And what the music industry started to do was grow the pop star with the audience. That's exactly, Katie, what you're talking about, to have them become more edgy over time. And there was always a suspicion that was confirmed by how they would do that. And several years ago, I went to and I think I read about this in that article, I went to a conference down at Disney World that was put on by marketers to kids. It was called Kid Power. And one of the seminars I went to, these were people who were marketing everything from John Deere to the NFL to, Leapfrog and all those different things. Crazy when you think about the broad spectrum of people trying to grab the young audience. But I went to one that was called How to Make a Pop Star. And the person got up and very proudly said, I am the person who's responsible for the Britney Spears phenomenon. And I was like, okay, all right, this is going to be interesting. And so she laid out everything in the plan. And then she said to us, we've got a couple of stars in waiting that we're working on the plan to unfold the plan for them. And she played us music from two of them. I cannot remember the one because I don't think the one ever made it. But the other one, just I think within a year, I'm driving and I have the radio on and I hear this song, but I've heard this before. Where did I hear this? And it was there, and it was Chris Brown. And it was, there's the formula. The formula works. And so, yeah, there's so many things at work here. So let's talk a little bit about the theme. Obviously, just as background, we know Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, and she has a history as well of broken relationships. She's written about this. She's lamented this. That seems to be a pretty common theme in what she does. And then she's in this relationship with Travis Kelce, boyfriend, now fiance. They're seen everywhere, driving people like me nuts. And maybe a lot of our listeners as well, unless you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan. But, so this is happening. And then this song comes out that's Wood, that's celebrating her relationship with him. So who wants to go first and kind of unpack, the progression of this song? And we'll do this real quick right before we take a break. It's funny. Nobody wants to do it. Go ahead,
I can get back. But,
Yeah.
but I mean, I like, maybe I won't walk through the whole song, but I think the way that she, in some ways, geniusly portrays this like superstition, like this innocent, I just have these superstitions, and then brings in these sexual innuendos, and I think I would say overt sexual innuendos that really help paint a picture. And it's like, yeah, I mean, anyone who has any sort of cognitive ability to comprehend anything that is being said here knows exactly what she's saying. And it just continues. It kind of starts off so innocent and just sort of like, oh, I've got these superstitions, and then it just gets into, I mean, things that, and I think like, man, yeah.
I can fill in the blanks here. So I
Yeah.
think the song, which is not long and it's really catchy, I think the song is sort of a history, a relational history for her, past, present, and what she hopes to be is her future. So like you're talking about the superstitions there, so she makes a lot of references to black cats stepping on a crack, being unlucky, some fingers crossed, knocking on wood, wishing on a falling star. Those are superstitious things. And she's basically saying that, I've tapped into those because my relationships have been bad, and I really need to get into a good relationship, right? I've had bad luck. That's been her lot in life relationally and romantically. And then she goes to Kelce, and he's kind of the cure to all this. And she admits lyrically her hesitancy at first, right? I admit I've been a little superstitious. Fingers crossed until you put your hand in mine. Seems to be that you and me, we make our own luck. And so now they're in a relationship, all right? And she's talking about that. And then she proceeds to address the audience. And I'm going to read these with obvious innuendo about their sexual relationships. And I'm going to read this from a little piece we wrote that's going to be attached with this. And we're going to release this, a 3D review of the song Wood. And folks can find it on our website. But then she starts to talk specifically about their sexual relationship and the attributes of Kelce's manhood. So she, this is where it's hard to read, but I'll say, forgive me, it sounds cocky. He amatized me and opened my eyes. Amatized is basically a censored version of a slang term about the male anatomy, which refers to someone who is hypnotized by a man's genitals and the sexual pleasure he provides. Then she goes on to see his love was the key. This was the line that really was man, so hard to just listen to and understand and say, how did you do this? His love was the key that opened my thighs. The curse on me was broken by your magic wand. New heights of manhood. That's a reference to the New Heights podcast the Kelce brothers have. I ain't got a knock on wood. So it just goes on like that. So that's the message. And I want to say this, that 3 days after the album dropped, she appeared on Jimmy Fallon. It was Monday of the week that we're recording here. And he was going through a lot of the different songs with her. It was a long interview. And she discussed the writing process for the song Wood. He was asking her about that. And they would play a little bit of it and, kind of dance along. And she would sing along with it. And what was crazy to me was the audience was singing just 3 days. Like they knew the lyrics to this 3 days later, very excitedly singing. So here's what she said. He asked her about the writing process for the provocative lyrics. She says, I brought this into the studio and I was like, I want to sort of do a throwback kind of timeless sounding song I had this idea about. I ain't gonna knock on wood. And it would be all these superstitions, and it really started out in a very innocent place. I don't know what happened. I got in there, we started vibing, and I don't know. I don't know how we got here, but I love the song so much. And so that's what our kids are hearing. That's what's out there. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to start to look at this under the light of God's Word and think about some of the themes that are there and how the Scriptures address those things. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Our mission here at CPYU is to increase the ability of home and church to nurture children and teens into a lifetime of biblically faithful, whole-life Christian discipleship. That's why we've created our free weekly Youth Culture Field Report. It's a weekly resource filled with the latest youth culture news, research, trends, biblically sound analysis, and more. If you want to lead the children and teens you know and love through the rapidly changing world of today's youth culture, you need to subscribe to this free weekly resource. It's easy. Just go to cpyu.org and scroll down to find the subscription link. Subscribe to the CPYU Youth Culture Field Report today so that we can walk alongside you in your efforts to nurture kids in the Christian faith. Okay, so we're going to continue our conversation here. Man, it seems awkward, right, talking about this. And that, I think, is indicative of the fact that we've got a sense that what's being addressed here are things, that shouldn't be addressed in this context and in the way they're being addressed by the singer Taylor Swift in her song Wood. And then we're distressed a little bit, or maybe a lot, about how this is landing. And people aren't really thinking twice about this. And I want to say this, we say this all the time at CPYU, that music, and really all media, is reflective and directive. It's both a map and a mirror. And when we say that, what we're trying to say is that in the directive mapping part, it meets us where we're at with our vulnerabilities, young and old alike. And we know especially our kids have great vulnerability and are easily influenced, right? And it meets us there and it says, this is the way life is supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to believe. This is how you're to behave. Now, that makes this song very troubling. But it's also important for us to recognize that not only is it a map that's directive, but it's a mirror that's reflective. And for those of us who care about kids, we do need to hear this. We need to understand this. We need to reckon with this. Yeah, we've got to listen to it. That's what I'm saying. And it's not listening to it to influence our values, our attitudes, our behaviors, not for it to serve as a map for us in terms of what we believe and how we believe we're to live in the world, but rather it as a mirror, it should map for us or reflect back to us what the basic ideas and worldview components are that people are believing now, and then map in turn for us how we're going to respond. It's kind of like, I always go back to Paul in Athens. He was greatly distressed at what he saw, but he didn't look away. He kept looking, and he looked carefully at their objects of worship because he wanted to be able to speak truth into that to correct their false thinking. And this is certainly, what we need to do here as well. By the way, I went on, no official video has dropped yet. It'll be interesting, when that comes out. But I went on to some of the lyric videos that are posted on YouTube and elsewhere, and I scrolled down through some of the comments, and it was very interesting. The comments are divided as I scrolled through it quickly between those who are going, man, this is awesome, or getting sarcastic about certain things, kind of laughing it off sort of as locker room humor. And then there were those who were like sitting back and stunned. And this was one that I read that I wrote down. It says mothers are actually listening to this with their daughters like it's normal. And I'm thinking about that one because I go back to this is normal. Chris said that, right? This has become normal, and it should not be normal. So this is where we bring the light of God's word to bear. So there's a lot of teaching points here. You can use this as a prompt for teaching in your home and in your ministry. What are the correctives the scriptures bring? And so I'll start with you, Katie. You know, you're working with kids, you're working with girls. It's not just our girls who are hearing this. I'm sure the guys are getting a kick out of this as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things we obviously need to be paying attention to is how the lyrics of that song, while you were talking about how it kind of is a mirror to our culture, these lyrics obviously give us a very good yet, I don't know, scary, I guess, reflection of the current cultural standards in terms of sexuality. And, I think one of the things that as parents and as youth workers, we need to be making sure we are talking to our kids and our students about is what is biblical sexuality. I was actually just listening to one of the other CPYU podcasts, the Word in Youth Ministry with Kyle Hopsmith. They just dropped an episode on dating, and how one of the things that they talked about in there is we get so focused on when we think about sexuality, we get so focused on talking about like sexual sin in terms of like gender sin, with the transgender movement or homosexual sin. But God also hates heterosexual sin. And pointing kids to scripture on what God's plan is for biblical sexuality, looking at Genesis 1 and 2, looking at Matthew 19, looking at Ephesians 5, that the only place that these sorts of relationships should exist is within the context of the covenant of marriage between one man and one woman. And that, as I was listening to that podcast and kind of thinking about this conversation, I was like, yeah, we do tend to, just focus on these other sins when it comes to sexuality, and not also teaching our students that there's plenty of heterosexual sin that God also has things to say about. And unfortunately, I think, as Christians, we often don't pay as much attention to that. So really making sure that we are talking to our students about what does biblical sexuality look like? What is the appropriate context for these sorts of relationships? And, whether you like Taylor and Travis or not, clearly what they are talking about goes against God's design, and helping the kids understand that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that it's the physical attributes that are being celebrated here in the relationship, as if, and we know that in our culture, the pursuit of pleasure, and God made sex to be pleasurable. Let's not deny that. But the pursuit of pleasure is primary, and many times the primary reason that folks get involved in sexual activity of all sorts, looking for self-satisfaction, right, and to experience pleasure. And it's not about the giving of oneself, and so the sacredness is lost, obviously, when you start singing about it. But it almost, I think in some ways, again, I know there's more to their relationship, I'm hoping, than just the physical, but it almost objectifies, Travis, and it serves to teach objectification, which is exactly what we're trying not to do. We've worked hard in youth ministry to teach our boys not to buy into the marketing messages that lead them to objectify women. And so that troubles me, but also at the same time, it's teaching our young girls, this is how you look at a man. This is what you value in a man. I know there's so much more than that, but those thoughts came to mind as you were talking about that. Tim, you wanted to say something.
Well, yeah, I think the line that it's his love was the key that
Yeah.
opened my, and the correlation between love and intercourse, essentially, is what she's saying, is so twisted. We know, the way Jesus defines love in John 15 is no greater love knows that than he who laid on his life for his friends. Like, he's redefined what love is. It's sacrificial. It's and I think, to me, like, when I'm teaching our kids about, when we talk about sex at school, we talk about it from a Genesis 2:24 perspective, that God created man and woman to be together in a covenant relationship, that this is a union. And then I do, like, I think if there was ever a time, and I think there always has been, but to be very clear, like First Thessalonians, where Paul just says, like that we're to abstain from sexual immorality, and abstain is like it's a strong word. It's a clear word. There's no gray in it that would go, well, maybe at this circumstance, but we're actually to flee from this, to abstain from, to remove it, to not have it be a part of our lives. And I think, I don't know. I read this quote, and I don't know who said it, but it just says, pop culture treats love like a spark that fades. Scripture treats love like a covenant fire that refines. And I think when we look at these lyrics and we look at what's being communicated, and I think of the young girls not only objectifying men, but going, okay, so if I feel what I think is love, then this is what needs to happen in that relationship, according to Taylor Swift, and so and that just becoming so distorted. I think the song itself reduces intimacy to almost this, like, mere physical metaphor. It's just a metaphor. It's like the because then, and I mean, that filters into like our intimacy. Like, if intimacy is just a feeling, and if it's just physical, truly, I mean, you think of that in the perspective of your relationship with God. How do I grow in intimacy with God? If it's so shallow, and if it's only something that I can experience here, and we've made it weird, then how does that look, and what does that look like for our kids? But I think reducing it to just like that physical metaphor, and truly, I think it erodes the Imago Dei. It erodes so many different things. But I think that for me, the big things would be addressing just the way God designed marriage, and the call as Christians to abstain. I think, and I don't know if, like, so here in Alberta, in our libraries, our premier recently removed sexually explicit books from our library. and they're awful. Like, she would read some of it, and they'd interrupt her from reading them because they're too offensive. And these are in elementary and junior highs. And so we removed them, and the pushback, the lashing out, the anger that she received from people for this happening. And to me, I look at this and I just think about Katie, to your point, like, things that we have made okay for our kids, we're now going to have to try to take back.
Mm-hmm.
And we see it as human nature to get angry when we try to take back things that she was innocent. She, sung songs about having our own personal song, and now it's this. And so now parents are trying to take back, and we're going to get, it's going to be anger. And I think it is that in my own life, for like first in line, just that lack of discernment early on, to go, hey, we want to be really, really careful what we're allowing and making okay. Because once we make something okay, it's really, really hard to take it back.
Yeah. So, one of the thoughts you prompted there for me, and, stick with me on this. Think about this with me, that, I wonder, what's the fallout of this, right? So I'm imagining a 5-year-old girl, a 7-year-old girl, a 10-year-old girl, or, boys of the same age who will be listening. And this is in the context of a world where, let's talk about the word grooming. When I was growing up, whenever you heard the word grooming, or you heard the word grooming on TV, or not on television, it was usually in reference to taking care of, something on your physical body that needed to be cleaned up, right? So grooming your beard, grooming your mustache, grooming your hair. As you get older, your nose hairs, your ear hairs, all these things, so that's grooming. I don't hear that much anymore. When I hear the word grooming, and I hear it on television, and I just read it this morning, in an article about a youth pastor who's been accused, allegedly, and there's a lot of evidence that will convict this person. Part of what they did was they were grooming girls in their youth group, right? And I think that this stuff verges on, if not it is grooming, because the more you fill your mind with these things, so Taylor Swift, she's an icon, she's a role model. And what does she say she did? What did his love make her do? And you referred to that, Tim, and the lyrically, her thighs. Now that's normalized. And I'm thinking about men who, have perversions, who are grooming kids. Does this make it easier? It doesn't make it right. It's wrong, and we're fighting as we should, the whole trafficking thing. But is this changing the attitudes of younger kids to make them more susceptible to grooming? We could connect the dots in a whole bunch of different ways here, and it just doesn't seem like any of them go down the right road that result in human flourishing. And to go back to what Katie said, embracing biblical sexuality, which is God's good design for our flourishing in our lives, and teaching that to our kids. Anything else here that you would think of, recommendation-wise? From the scriptures, I have some things as well, but anything you all would have?
I was just going to add, Walt, to what you were just talking about, because I had a lot of those same thoughts. And I actually had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and I just very casually asked, like, hey, have you listened to this new album? Like, have you listened to this song? And, I was kind of sharing some of my concerns. And, one of the things we were talking about was, what's the responsibility of these people who are supposed to be role models and are supposed to be, I don't know, helping shape the next generation? Like, what's their responsibility in all this? And I just thought that was a really interesting question. I don't have a great answer for it. I don't, in the few interviews that I've listened to, as Taylor's talked about this album, that has never even come up. So certainly I think discernment needs to be happening. That falls primarily on the parents, and us as youth workers. But I just think that's also a really important thing to think about as our kids, whether that's our own kids or our students in our ministry, are kind of latching on to these icons. How are we helping them to discern who's worth following and who's not?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a whole separate issue, but it just kind of, it just kind of came into my head as you were talking about, this whole issue with, now this is all normal.
Yeah.
And, what is that going to look like as we move forward?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Katie. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, no, and along those lines too, I think, and this is just one song of many that you could use, you could say this about, but I think the mixed messaging, I think, borderline gaslight, like even their interviews where they're kind of like, oh, what are you talking about? Like,
oh, yeah.
Like, we're not, that's being normalized. It's okay.
Gaslighting, right? You were going to say gaslighting.
And what does Proverbs say, right? Like it's the fool who says, oh, I was only joking, right? Like I was just kidding. But we're actually teaching a behavior to our students that goes like, hey, if I make someone uncomfortable, I can deflect and say, that wasn't my meaning. I didn't mean that. And I think one of the key factors to any eroding culture that you can see is a lack of accountability. And anytime that you see, especially those that have influence in leaders, when there's not accountability in a church and leadership, when there's not accountability in government, when there's not accountability in any sort of organization, and nowadays to try to hold someone accountable for anything that would be counter to what God has given us in his word, it feels near impossible. But at the same time, there's no one holding them accountable. They truly can say whatever they want, especially those with major influence, like someone like Taylor Swift. She can put out whatever she wants. Yeah. It's going to be received as gospel, and no one's going to challenge it.
Yeah, right? And we shouldn't be surprised that people who are not followers of Christ are going to produce things that don't reflect a lifestyle of following Christ, but reflect the other. And it's just one comment I'll make here. And I included this. We have a resource that will be attached to this. You can find it on our website. It's just coming out, and it's a 3D review of the song by Taylor Swift, Wood. And it goes through, discover this is what the song's about, discern how do we look at it under the light of God's word, which is what we've been talking about in this segment, and then decide what do we do with it. And one of the things I put in there was a quote from Aaron Wren, who's written a book just about how the world has changed, and we're now living not in a world that's positive towards Christianity. He would say that our Western culture was generally that way before 1994. Then between 94 and 2014, he would say that we were living in a neutral world where still okay, to be a God-fearing person who goes to church and talk about your faith. But now, he says, post 2014, we're living in the negative world. And he says this is a world where Christian morality is expressly repudiated and seen as a threat to the public good and the new public moral order. And so the response that so many are having, and that many will have to this conversation that we're having right now, is, are you kidding me? This is what you guys are talking about here, biblical sexuality. That is so yesterday. And I think we're raising a generation of kids now who will not have categories for this, for biblical truth and biblical morality. Their basic categories, their basic worldview foundation will be what is coming across in this song and elsewhere. So we're going to take a break here, but I just want to remind folks that if you go onto our website, cpyu.org, you find the player for this particular episode of the podcast, and you scroll down. Chris Wagner will have put up anything we've talked about here that's a resource, including this 3D guide, any other resources we may have here at CPYU to help you, any books, things like that we've mentioned. You can check these things out. But besides the 3D review of the song, Wood, I'm gonna push two things. One is our guide to the teaching points on sexuality and gender that we need to hit. That's a handout we put together that would address and correct a lot of what's being taught in this particular song. And then we have a handout, what do we call it? A parent's primer on internet pornography. And we'll put that there as well. This will be the last comment I make before the break. I actually added this to the 3D review after I had originally written it. And it's that the word, I was thinking about this, the Greek word for or our word pornography is rooted in the Greek word porneia, which means to practice prostitution, sexual immorality, or fornication, which is sex outside of marriage. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul uses this word porneia in reference to any kind of sinful and illegitimate sexual activity, and I truly believe she's practicing and preaching a pornographic lifestyle. And this is where, look, I'm not overstating this. It's pornography. That's what it is. It's lyrical pornography. Who cares what is in the video? It could be crazy. I don't know when the video comes out, but that's what this is, and this is why we would say to parents, you need to wake up. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back to finish up. Hey, youth workers, it's happening again. The 4th Annual Northeast Youth Ministry Summit will be held from March 16 to 19 in the beautiful Laurel Highlands of Pennsylvania at the Ligonier Camp and Conference Center. We invite you to join us for 4 days of deep and practical youth ministry training, shared meals, worship, and community building, all around this year's theme of Every Square Inch. We've assembled an experienced group of youth ministry trainers and practitioners who will lead you into a deeper understanding of how to raise up a generation of students who live out their faith in every square inch and moment of their lives. We'll gather for 6 large group sessions, and you can choose from 20 breakouts, and there's a whole lot more. Visit nymsummit.org for more information and to register. That's nymsummit.org. No matter where you live and are doing youth ministry, I hope you'll join us at the 2026 Northeast Youth Ministry Summit. Okay, back to our conversation. Tim McAlpine, Katie Schneider, these are 2 of our CPYU research fellows. What a great crew that is, and it's been fun to get to know these folks and watch them get to know each other from all over the place. And they both said in the beginning, they first, when I asked, where did you first hear this song? Well, we have a texting loop with our research fellows. It's just a wonderful, wonderful loop there. We're encouraging each other, praying for each other, joking with each other, creating AI images that defame each other. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen. There's a great group. They're producing some good thinking and good resources for you folks. Chris and I are so thrilled that we can have these folks working with us, and we're learning from them as well. But I wanted to ask them, so when we talk about our 3D steps, discover, discern, decide, it's not enough just to know. We have to do. That's a decide part. When you look in the book, A Student's Guide to Navigating Culture, which you can get from us and put in the hands of your students, it's world, word, walk. It's not just enough to know what the world is saying and what God's word says, but we've got to do. There has to be action. We need to adjust our walk accordingly. So I'm going to go to everybody here who's on the podcast with me and say, give me one or two suggestions on what you think you're going to do with this. And think about parents, think about youth workers. Give us one or two good suggestions that we can walk away with that we're going, okay, yeah, I've got to address this, and here's a good idea. Who wants to go first?
I can start. My first, I think, thing to approach would be the parents. Just as we've been having this conversation, and even in our text conversation we were having, like, I'm not surprised that our kids are interested in this music. But as parents and as youth workers, we have a responsibility to help them think through that. Their little brains are not fully developed, so they are not always making the best choices when it comes to what media they're consuming. So I think I'm almost going to start with the parents. Like, I've had some very casual conversations with some of my students about this song already, and I will continue to do that. But I think it's more important to get this information in front of our parents, because I feel like a lot of them either don't know or haven't really thought through how, like, what this is doing to our kids. And we could say that about a lot of different things. And I haven't fully figured out what that's going to look like, in terms of, like, providing a resource other than, maybe the 3D digital guide that Walt is going to put out. But, like, really trying to open our parents' eyes to, this is what our kids are listening to. This is the message that they're receiving, even if it's not consciously. And these are some of the potential ramifications that are going to come of this, especially if, these kids are listening to this at younger and younger ages. So I think my approach is going to start with the parents, and then certainly, hopefully, trickle down to the kids as well.
Okay, so I like that. Raise parental awareness, because a lot of times parents aren't aware. Interesting thing, in one interview, Taylor Swift actually said that when her own mother heard the song, she did not know what it was about. She didn't catch the innuendo. She thought it was all about superstitions and loved the song. Is that true? I don't know. That's what she said. But I think a lot of people are missing it, or if they're not missing it, they're missing an opportunity to speak to it if they don't speak to it. So that's good. Okay, so let's raise parental awareness. Chris, what about you?
Just to add, jump off of that, we do need to inform parents, and in doing so, we also kind of have to equip them to realize that this is going to have to lead to some tough decisions. Like Tim said, it's hard to, after you've said yes to something, now you all of a sudden have to back. So if we've got, whether it be 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 17-year-old girls listening to, or boys listening to Taylor Swift, and we've been okay with that, and all of a sudden now we have to say, you know what, maybe not so much. Like, that's going to be a tough decision, and it's going to, so we have to equip parents to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if you first of all be informed, it might now mean telling your 7-year-old, you know what, we're not going to listen to Taylor Swift anymore, or at least this new album or this song in particular, whatever. And so just making parents aware that, like, That's
Yeah.
going to be a tough conversation, but also equip them with like, and what we've done in the previous two, segments of this podcast is
Yeah.
kind of tell them the conversations that need
Right.
to take place, but
Critically and Christianly, thinking critically and Christianly.
at the right age develop, talking about this with a 5-year-old versus a 15-year-old is going to look a lot different, but knowing to say, if you're going to say, hey, no, we shouldn't listen to this Taylor Swift song,
Yeah.
you're going to have to age appropriately tell them why,
Yeah.
and that should lead to some good discussion.
Yeah, you and Tim talking about, the difficulty of, kind of stepping backwards, all right, peeling back. I think this should also serve as a warning to parents because we have said for years, watch out where this is going. This is nothing new. As Katie said in the beginning, we've seen it. It's the same old story over and over. And this is why when your kids are young and music is being marketed to them or any sort of media, be careful what you may think this is or you may think this is innocent stuff. But it is because it's entry-level stuff by design, and this is going to change. And, Taylor Swift, she's been swept up into the soup of youth culture where she just thinks this is what I need to believe and this is how I need to behave. And that's what makes it so hard to watch and listen to and see this progression go and just getting our kids wrapped up in this. So, yeah.
Real quick, one thing that just came to mind, I hesitate to bring it up because I do not wish ill will on Travis or Taylor in the relationship in any way whatsoever. But because for the population that loves the relationship, if they ever hit bumps in the road, if there's ever a breakup, we probably should prepare kids for that.
Oh, yeah.
For what that means. Now, they shouldn't be devastated by something like that. Now, we should be heartbroken that relationships
she has no
fall.
history of that, right?
Sure.
So, yeah.
We should be heartbroken when marriage relationships fall apart, assuming they follow through with marriage. That should be something that breaks our heart, but we shouldn't necessarily be we shouldn't mourn that in the way that I anticipate kids mourning that if that were to happen again. I don't wish that to happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but maybe that's the kind of thing we need to preemptively have discussions about too.
Yeah. Well, bumps in the road. You mentioned bumps in the road. Who doesn't have them? They're lying if they say they don't. And this is where I'm just thinking a very practical thing. If you're a youth worker, get your kids exposed to some of the non-pop star, older, non-trendy couples in your church who have had a long-term relationship.
Yeah,
set
them up as the example, and not Taylor Swift.
Yeah, tomorrow I'm going to participate in a funeral for a 94-year-old woman who passed away, who I've known since my adolescent years, and she and her husband, 69 years of marriage. Which is just an amazing thing. These are the things we need to point to. Tim, you got a strategy for us?
Yeah, I love what's been said. I too would be focusing on parents, and I think for me, helping just equip with some really good questions, helping them to think critically. I think pursuing the hearts of students and parents, for that matter, just as far as like that. Do we really believe God's design is best? Do I truly believe that is actually what's best for myself, for my kid? And I think too, my role is a little different in that I work as kind of a local church liaison with the school, and I try to connect with our local church pastors. But I think the more local church youth pastors that we have that would be like-minded and aligned in this, that we can have a continual, consistent message with our students when it comes to music, things that we're filling our head and our heart with. And so wherever, because right now what I'm finding in our city is our students are going to like 2 or 3 different youth groups. Like we have our local church that we're a part of, but the youth is on different nights and their friends are going, so they're going to different youth groups. And I think to be able to have pastors to, and in my role I have the opportunity where I can resource, and so I think that's something I would do. And then I don't know, can I just give a few resources I would use? What would that be?
Yeah.
Like I think Don't Follow Your Heart by Thaddeus Williams.
Yeah, good book.
A great one. And then just real practically for parents, What Do I Say When by Andrew Walker and Christian Walker, A Parent's Guide to Navigating Cultural Chaos for Children and Teens, been super helpful. as well as Lead Them to Jesus by Mike McGarry. And his book is just helpful. It's just a handbook. It covers a ton of different topics, because I understand, first and foremost as a parent, the overwhelming sense of man, I've gone too far. So I would say to parents, like, it's not too late to right the ship. If we feel we've failed, and like, we can repent, we can be forgiven, and we can course correct. And yeah, there's some challenging conversations, but the Lord is kind to provide everything that we need to see that happen. But also that overwhelming sense of like, I don't know how to have these conversations. So resources like this I've found super helpful, even in my day-to-day work, and as well as a parent.
Katie, did you have a resource? I saw you spinning around to look at your shelf.
Yeah, I was just thinking more, thinking as a youth worker, like, how do we, try to teach these things to our kids? So I was looking for a study, and I found one of them, but I couldn't find the other one. If you're looking for like a good study to like walk through, biblical sexuality and what that looks like, Harvest USA put out one called Alive. The top person who reviewed it is this guy, Walt Mueller. I don't know if anybody knows who he is or cares what he has to say.
Not many.
Not many. But no, I did this series with some of my high school students. I think it was a couple of years ago now. And it really just helps give teenagers a biblically sound, gospel-centered view of sexuality, especially as we think about, all the things Taylor's songs are teaching us, or trying to teach us. How do we fight against that as youth workers?
Yeah.
So using a study like that, I also know Christopher Yuan has made a youth series based
Holy Sexuality in the Gospel.
Yeah,
really good.
I saw that. I have his book on my shelf, but I didn't have any of the information.
I've seen both. Yeah, we'll include links to that. Very good.
And you could almost do that as like a side by side, like your parents. You could have read the book, but then walk through that series with your students. And I know for a while there, it was either super inexpensive or free. I don't know if that's still the case.
Yeah,
but
it's inexpensive, and you can watch it in your home with your kids. The video, yeah, it's very good, very good.
So those would be a couple, like, if you're saying, okay, practically, how as a youth worker or even as a parent, how do I talk through some of these issues? Those are two really good ones.
Yeah, this is so good. All right. And I'll just point people to the 3D review that we're going to post. You can find that on our website. All these other resources, as I mentioned, will be there listed under the player in the resource section for this episode of the podcast. Chris, thank you as always for pulling this together for us and making sure everything's working. Tim, it's good to see you. And Katie, the same thing. And I'm looking forward to seeing both of you probably the next time in, face-to-face, right, at the Northeast Youth Ministry Summit. So looking forward to that. And we'd invite all of our friends who are listening to come to that. It's a great event we have, and you'd be so encouraged and equipped. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode of Youth Culture Matters.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.